Having finished with the peptide hormones, we now start with the steroids. So very few tissues make steroid hormones. Those are the gonads, the placenta, and the adrenal cortex. So the adrenal glands, if you remember, are above the kidney, and the adrenal cortex is the outer section of those glands, as opposed to the medulla. Now, all steroids are lipophilic. This is an example here of cholesterol is the parent compound for all steroid hormones. They're all going to look like they have these 3 rings and then this 4th ring that's penta, only 5. The important thing about them being lipophilic is that they can cross the membrane. That's going to be a big distinguishing item from the peptides. It's going to tell them apart. So in this slide, you can see that schematic drawing like I showed you for the peptides. This time, I have, again, a picture of the hormone, but instead of just waiting and finding a receptor on the actual membrane, this receptor may be in the inside of the cell. It may be in the cytoplasm, or that receptor for a different type of hormone might even be in the nucleus of that cell. So they are able to diffuse through that membrane, making it very different. Now, you would imagine that something that can diffuse through the membrane is going to have a quicker response, right? Because it's going to be able to do it more quickly. It can go right through and it will have an effect on that cell. But that's not correct. It actually has a slower response than a peptide would. And let me show you why. If we had to draw the big picture here of a vessel and the hormone traveling in the vessel, and then it's going to actually reach the cell and come into the cell and go through all these mechanisms, I want to be able to show it to you in pieces. So I'm going to cut this diagram up. Okay, and I'm going to start with that vessel. So the first thing about it being lipophilic is that it's not water soluble and it can't just dissolve in the blood when it travels. So it's going to need to attach to another molecule that will make it soluble in blood. So essentially it needs a taxi. It needs a carrier. And that carrier is usually a protein. So a protein's going to have to carry it through until it's distributed over to the cell. So this purple here again is a cell membrane, and this is a steroid hormone arriving at that particular cell. We take the next piece here in that diagram. You see that once it comes in, it needs to find a receptor. And that receptor is going to be either in the cytoplasm or inside the nucleus. Those are 2 different pathways that could occur. But still, the yellow little ball that represents the hormone is going to attach onto one of those receptors. Okay, so I get it to the receptor. What happens next? This is the first arrow showing, coming into the nucleus. And what's going to happen now is there's, like in peptides, some protein is going to have the effect of changing the behavior of that cell. Only in this case of the steroids, you haven't made the protein yet. It still has to be manufactured, has to be made. So what happens there is that the DNA will have to be read in the nucleus. Messenger RNA is going to copy a piece of that DNA and then export it out to the cytoplasm. Do you see how this is already taking longer than it would have with a peptide? So it's exiting now that nucleus, and now it's going to be translated into a protein. So you will have to manufacture, now that you have the code, the DNA code, and the sequence of amino acids, now you'll have to put together those amino acids, or the cell will have to, in order to make this protein. Then the protein has to be packaged, and now shown here is that new protein. So that process is going to take a lot longer. The question then, how long? How long until steroid hormones work, and how long does the effect last? Well, there is a lag time. It's about up to 90 minutes. So you do make proteins quickly, still, just an hour and a half, but still much more slowly than the 4 to 5 minutes of a peptide. Then how long does it last? Well, the half-life of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, lasts about 60 to 90 minutes. So it's long-lasting, the stress hormone. Just think of all these fires happening right now, and those stress hormones cortisol just being produced in our body, and how long it takes for you to just settle back down again. So these, they can circulate a long time. These hormones can circulate in the blood with that protein carrier that I showed you, and they can be circulating for a long time. What does cortisol do? It's released in response to stress. It's a picture of an animal being chased by a leopard, and so your stress cortisol levels go up, and it allows you to respond to that stress. So it increases your blood sugar. It aids in the breakdown of fat and the breakdown of protein and the breakdown of carbohydrates, so that you can further use it in the muscle and get out of there, escape, run, do what you need to do. It also reduces the ability of your immune response. So people tend to get sick after a lot of stress, correct? It's because that immune response is dampened while you're trying to respond to that stress. That's all I need to say about the steroid hormones. So we've talked about peptides, we've talked about steroids, and the third one is the amine. The amine hormones are derived from amino acids, right? They're hence the amine part. But it's only 2 amino acids, either tryptophan or tyrosine. So tryptophan manufactures melatonin. Melatonin is a hormone that is responsible for diurnal rhythms. It allows you to sleep or not sleep if you don't have it. And serotonin is one of the feel-good hormones. It gives you sort of pleasurable feelings of peace. Tyrosine is in a thyroid hormone, and you know about thyroxine, thyroid hormones. It's also in adrenaline and noradrenaline. This is the molecule of tyrosine, and it's not something you have to know. I just wanted to give you an idea of what the molecule looks like. How fast do they act? Well, adrenaline and dopamine are very fast acting, like 2 to 3 minutes, very quickly. And thyroid hormones are very slow acting, about 7 to 10 days. Another question that we have as we move on is, do receptors fail? What if the receptor doesn't work, right? And you have some sort of hormone, but the receptor doesn't work, whether it's inside the cell or on the membrane of the cell. So can these fail? And the answer is yes. Endocrine disease can come from receptor error. So an example of that is type 2 diabetes, known as hyperinsulinemia. And these high levels of insulin lead to the cell removing some receptors from the membrane. So if there's too much insulin, then the cell seemingly wants to not be affected by that much insulin, and it removes those receptors. So the result of that is you might have insulin released by the pancreas and circulating around, but the cell doesn't respond. And the cell doesn't respond because it doesn't insert those receptors are malfunctioning, sorry. just a reminder of what the insulin response is, what it looks like. You eat a meal, and what happens? And we have the sequence, remember, of the colors from your text. So in the increased glucose after eating a meal, that's going to stimulate the pancreas to release insulin, which is put into circulation, this little blood vessel here, and it's going to target the tissues. And what does the tissue do? The tissue then increases glucose uptake. Remember, it'll insert a glucose carrier, and it'll bring down the blood glucose that was too high to start with when you ate a meal. So that's sort of the normal feedback. Now think about when this insulin is released, travels and targets a tissue, but that tissue doesn't respond. And that would be the example of the type 2 diabetes. We're going to stop it there. We've gone through the 3 types of hormones, which are the peptides, the steroids, and the amines. Thanks for listening.